All right, we are live. My guest today is Rina O, who my readers will know is a very brave survivor of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. And Rina, there's so much to ask you about. You are just back from Washington and from that historic moment in front of the Capitol, and look at the amazing results, both the House and the Senate saying, yes, release the Epstein files. And now I guess we wait for Donald Trump to sign off. Why don't you what was it like being there yesterday with the other survivors?
It was a moment of reckoning. Number one, I'll begin with that. The whole experience was surreal. The way we were treated with so much compassion and care by the congressmen and women. They invited us into the gallery to sit through the 15 minutes that they gave Congress to vote on the bill, and we were watching the board. And I never expected in a million years in my lifetime that I would sit in that gallery. I mean, I watch it all the time on C-SPAN, and they were just so nice. Everyone. This was just a truly historic moment, and for the first time, none of us felt ashamed. We felt empowered. We felt like people cared about us, and that was really important. And we also all just kind of like cried this big cry of relief after all these years that our government is finally doing something about this.
Well, and then where were you when the Senate? I mean, I was completely taken by surprise that the Senate rushed it through so fast. I mean, what was the feeling with
Um,
you and the others?
I was at the candlelight vigil with the rest of the survivors and Congress members of the Congress, and we were dedicating, just a day to the joint suffrage of our journey and others alike. Not just the Epstein victims, but all victims of this topic, which is very, very harsh, and it's very hard to even talk about. Um, and we were in the process of doing that. And as soon as it ended, someone told me that, it's going through the Senate, and Lisa Phillips was supposed to go and participate. And next thing you know, another survivor told me, well, she canceled and she's now on CNN. I was like, what's going on? Senate, the bill went to Senate. I went back to my hotel and I started checking the news, and then, a couple hours later, it passed Senate, and I was like, wow, this is happening a lot quicker than we expected. It all happened in one day. And yes, now it's sitting in front of President Trump, and we're waiting for his signature, and everyone's holding their breath.
Yes, indeed. Well, and I want to ask you about are the victims hopeful that he will indeed sign it and these files will see the light of day?
I haven't really spoken to the other victims to find out, how they feel. I know some of them expressed a lot of anger because it's been taking so long. And my approach is a little different. I'm very patient. I think he will sign it eventually. If he doesn't sign it this week, I'll wait until next year, maybe 10. No, he's not going to be here in 10 years. He has 3.5 years left. But I believe he will sign it. He said he wanted the GOP to support the bill, and I don't see any reason why he wouldn't sign it at this point.
So, how did this come about? And I want to know, how many of the other survivors had you met before, if any?
Well, I knew Lisa Phillips because she was a good friend of mine from back in the 2000s. Before I met Jeffrey Epstein, I was really good friends with Lisa. I saw her, all the time. I saw her several times a week. We were part of the same friends group. And I knew Marika from that time period as well, but not as well as Lisa. Um, Aside from Lisa and Marika, I didn't really know the other girls. I've seen them, appear when I read about them, but not I didn't meet them in person. I met a lot of new people, yesterday and the day before, and a lot of
That's real.
that have never come forward before.
Really. So tell me how this whole thing came about. Presumably, your attorneys, right? You all share the same attorneys, I think, right? Brad Edwards and Brittany
Um,
Henderson.
Actually, no. I found out from speaking to several of the girls, you know, some new and others I already know that they're represented by a different law firm. I was represented by Brad Edwards and Brittany Henderson Edwards for 2 cases. So I know who those girls are. Like, there were about 5 of us. Um, and then there were probably about 10 to 15. I didn't do an official head count total. Some came from Boy Schiller, and I think one of the girls mentioned Barbara Kaplan. So they don't all come from the same law firm. I believe there was a nonprofit organization that was sort of organizing some of these events, but I'm not sure. I just remember getting um, a schedule of what we were supposed to do yesterday, and that's something I wasn't expecting.
And that came from the nonprofit
It's
organization.
Yes, it's called World Without Exploitation. They are the organization that organized that PSA. It was directed by Lisa Bryant, who's a Netflix filmmaker,
Right. Oh, sure, sure, sure.
and she was also there. Lisa was there. Um,
Right.
I actually wanted to participate in the PSA, but I was told that they didn't have room for me. I don't know what happened. I think there's a lot of conflict with me being present because I'm not Virginia Giuffre's friend, and there's a lot of like there's just something there, there's a big like separation there. Like, she has her group of friends, and then I sort of have my little small group, which is like 2 people, 2 or 3. It was
Well,
a little uncomfortable.
right. Well, we should explain to viewers who may not know, but um, you and I spoke shortly after um Virginia passed away
Mm.
because and so readers of this Substack can go back and look how in April I spoke to Rina and it emerged that you had a lawsuit against Virginia that was still very much active. Um, and, it speaks to the complications of this story. I mean, I don't know if you've read Virginia's memoir, Nobody's Girl, but she does stick her hand up and say, yes, I recruited other girls, other women. And I know your feeling is that she really um kind of was the one who was sexually aggressive to you, right?
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. I didn't touch Virginia. I didn't do anything to her at all. She assaulted me and tried to cover it up by accusing me of a false allegation. Um, I don't know where that came from. I've spoken to a lot of different people, including an attorney that we both worked with who had never heard of these allegations. So I'm not sure when the allegations began, when she started, conceptualizing it, but it happened after he stopped working with her. And it was just really hurtful that she would say something like that about me because I'm not that kind of person. And secondly, those things never happened. And the entire chapter she wrote about me just sounds to me like a fairy tale, but not a very nice fairy tale. Um, aside from her accusing me of these things, she also said that I had a solo exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And I never had a solo exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I'm like, that in itself shows that she really didn't know me. She talks about Rena had these partners, etc. And this is the kind of sex act she engaged in with her ex-partners, but she never met any of my ex-boyfriends. She doesn't know who they are. Um, but the whole thing is so complicated and weird, and it doesn't make sense to me. And yesterday, aside from all of this, I decided to be the greater person. I was there in solidarity to support, all of Jeffrey Epstein's victims, those who are with us today and those who are not with us, and especially Carolyn Adriano.
Yeah.
Have you heard of her? She
I was there in the courtroom when Carolyn testified in Ghislaine Maxwell's trial. And, like you, she blamed Virginia for sexual abuse. I mean, this is, again, I'm very glad you were there yesterday. And, this is a very complicated story, but Carolyn was one of the 4 women who testified in Ghislaine Maxwell's trial and then very sadly died of a drug overdose in, I think, 2023. So did you remember? Did you know Carolyn?
I never met her in person, but I followed the case and I read her story, and I'm just so sad,
I know.
and devastated, and the fact that no one really talks about her, and
That's true. That's a very good point.
yeah, I'm sorry if I start crying because I actually was very late to the candlelight Virgil. I was probably about 20 minutes late, and I ran to the floral shop and I bought her a bouquet of flowers, and I just wanted her to be remembered. And um, I mentioned her name when we were asked to come up to the podium and introduce ourselves, and I told everyone I bought these bouquet of flowers for Carolyn, and then when it was over, I didn't want to take it back with me to my hotel room, and I found a very nice home for the bouquet, and Congresswoman Presley. I handed it to her, and she hugged me, and I was sobbing, and she pinned the card on her shirt and told me that she will dry the flowers and keep it in our office forever, and that just made me so happy. I hope Dorothy, Carolyn's mom, is watching. Um, I want her to be at peace and know that people love her daughter and that we'll always remember.
Yeah, you raise a very, very good point. I mean, one of the difficult, and actually I will say for Virginia, really brave things that I thought she did do in her memoir was cop to the fact that Carolyn stood on the stand at Maxwell's trial and, made these allegations about Virginia being her real recruiter and abuser at the beginning. And Virginia writes in her book that she doesn't doubt for a second that Carolyn was telling the truth. She believed her, but she couldn't remember because there were so many girls. And that was a chilling thing. So, it might be helpful, I think, Rena, if you can bear it to remind, people of what your journey has been to this point. You are an artist. You are, and now what happened to you? It's textbook Jeffrey Epstein, right? And textbook Ghislaine Maxwell. What people may not know is that you were very nearly called, right, as one of the witnesses in Maxwell's trial. But do you want to explain to viewers your story? pieces of it you'd like you're okay to tell?
Sure, I'm okay to share some parts of this story, minus the details of the abuse. That's just something I swore from day one I'll never reveal. I don't think it's appropriate for children. Everyone has access to the internet, and just for the privacy of the other victims, I don't want them to get harassed. I don't want to be harassed, and plus, I don't want to give any copycat Jeffrey Epstein's any ideas because they do exist, and I've heard these stories. I first met Jeffrey Epstein when I had just turned 21 years old, and it was the summer of the year 2000. Um, I met him through my friend Lisa Phillips. She had already met him on his island a few months before and told me about him. She knew this art collector who was a billionaire, and he owned a private island um, and a private jet and lived in this enormous townhouse. And, for me as an artist, I'm always looking for an art patron, or patrons who, can support my career. And it's really hard working in this field. Like it takes a very long time to actually make a living. You usually have to have another job, which I always did until very recently. Um, when she offered to introduce me to Jeffrey, I said, sure, I would love to meet him. And, maybe he can buy some of my artwork. And I went with her to meet with him in a townhouse. And it started from day one. I didn't realize what that was. What he did was sexual abuse until years later. At that age, it just seemed like, this is some creepy guy who's taking me into this like weird room, and there's a massage table, and everything that happened was very unconventional. But I sort of just brushed it aside as like maybe he's just like a very strange art collector. Like I know people in the art world can be eccentric, and I just cast him away as the most eccentric, creepiest guy, but he has a lot of money and he can buy my artwork. So I continued going back for 2 years, not realizing that I was being used. Some people recently have called it sex work, and I never really even associated what was happening as sex work. I still don't know if that's what it was that he did to me, but I don't like that word. If that's what it was, then I would have never even got over to the house. Like that's just it's not in my culture. It's not something that I would ever engage in.
So did he buy your artwork? And didn't he pay for you to go to an art college?
He offered me a scholarship to go to the School of Visual Arts. Um, and he did pay for some classes. And when I didn't offer or participate or even volunteer to see him and engage in sex acts, more specifically like sexual intercourse, he took that away immediately.
He took the
And
scholarship away.
he took the scholarship away. And then he called me back. He lured me back into, the townhouse. And then he, offered other things like, well, like he took the scholarship away, and then he offered me a full-time job. And this is where the whole like money, like strange, like financial transactions take place. And I already noticed it immediately back then. He said, I'm going to pay for your salary, and I'm going to get you a job, but I'm going to donate money from my nonprofit charity foundation. And through those funds, you're going to receive a paycheck, which was very bizarre. And the executive director of this nonprofit organization and the board members were all kind of like a little suspicious about this Jeffrey Epstein man. And they were trying to probe and figure out like where the money was coming from. But I was so young and naive, and she's like, okay, I'm getting a paycheck, and didn't really want to work at the charity, but he suggested it and said, well, you need to work. You need something new. And that was a new thing that he offered to get me to come back.
Wait, you were working for a non-profit and he was paying them to pay you.
Basically, he was donating, he was writing donation checks to this nonprofit, a really big nonprofit organization. I don't wanna name them at this moment. I think eventually all of this will come out in the Epstein files. So he was donating money, probably most likely writing it off as, tax exempt, donation, and then through that, I was being paid a salary.
And presumably in exchange, and was that what you wanted to do, by the way? Or you
No.
just
No, I did need a job, but that's not something that I was really into at the time. I wanted to do something with art. It's so all of a sudden went from art to you're going to art school, and he did commission me to make a painting at one point in between all of this. And then he's like, "Well, I'm gonna now I can't get you to come over, and because you're not volunteering to come and have intercourse with me." He just kept calling and offering new things, and this was one of the new things. And I really it wasn't a job that I loved, so I wasn't really excited about this job. And eventually ended up getting hired by PR firms who work in fashion PR, and that he had nothing to do with this. This is this was the beginning of me, starting to feel like this guy is trying to control me. I started feeling that I knew innately, because it almost felt like he was trying to buy me, like, "I'm going to own you and control you and make you become dependent on me of me." Um and when I met the fashion people and was hired to work full time for a PR firm, I just jumped ship, and I went for it, and I stopped working at the charity. And he actually I told him he wanted to go to the fashion shows, and that was really bizarre. And I was like, "Oh, I don't know if I could bring Jeffrey Epstein to these fashion shows at Bryant Park." It's like, how was he going to behave at these events? I knew there were models that were going over to his house, and that's the last thing I needed, is to have him, at my workplace behave inappropriately. So I never invited him to a single fashion show. You could
and
just imagine. I see the reaction on your face, like, oh my God, imagine Jeffrey Epstein, at Bryant
running
Park.
around fashion shows in New York. No, thank you. Very dangerous. So how did you? Well, two questions, and sort of take them in whatever order you would like. Where does Maxwell fit into this? And then how did you break? How did you get away?
So Gilan, for a long time, I didn't even know who she was. He never mentioned her name. Um, I still to this day don't think he was very fond of her, because he never bragged about her. He never mentioned her name. She introduced herself to me one day when I was in the sitting room. When you first walk into the townhouse and you turn left, there's a sitting room, and the butler always escorts every single guest into the sitting room to sit there and wait until Mr. Epstein is ready to see you. Like, he always said the same words: "Mr. Epstein is ready to see you, and you have to go in here and wait." While I was waiting there one day, she peered in, um, looked in, and kind of was like, "Hi, how are you? Who are you?" "My name is Gilan." And I was like, "My name's Rina." She's like, "Oh, you're Rina. You're all Jeffrey ever talks about." And I was like, "Oh, okay, who are you?" And then after that, she just left, and I didn't see her for a couple of months. And the next time I saw her, she was in her own townhouse, and they were renovating this new property that belonged to her, and she was there with a bunch of construction workers. Made it pretty obvious that I have this and you don't. And um she wasn't very nice, to be honest. To make a long story short, I didn't really have a very close relationship with this woman, because I just stayed away from her. I didn't get good energy from Gilan from day one, and I was always suspicious that she was not a good person. Um, and you know how sometimes women can be very malicious towards others, and she just looked like someone that would do something awful to me down the road, so I just stayed away from her.
There's some evidence to suggest she in particular.
Yeah.
Um, but so, and what about, you say your friend Lisa Phillips introduced you, so she must have given you a picture of this man that he's, you know, doing this not just with you, but with other, I mean, even younger girls. I mean, how aware were you? I mean, obviously Virginia was younger than you.
Oh,
I mean,
so
not that 21 is so old.
right. So first of all, um, she never mentioned, and I didn't know either, that they were underage girls. For as far as I was concerned, he was into models and girls our age. They were like 18 to 22, 23. I knew from day one, or from before even, going to the house, that he was not monogamous. She explained that to me. If you're going to see Jeffrey, you're not the only one. And obviously, because she was going to the house. So, I went there, and I wasn't really looking for a monogamous relationship at the time. My boyfriend had just broken up with me, and, I just wanted like a rebound. I wanted to get away from the stage, the mourning stage and grieving. And I was really heartbroken. I was a young girl. I met my ex-boyfriend when I was 19. We broke up 2 years later. And, at 19 years old, you still think that you're living in this fairy tale, and the first boy, man that you fall in love with, like, every girl thinks that's going to be the one, and he broke up with me, and immediately after I met Jeffrey, so I knew immediately from the beginning, before meeting him, and then afterwards, that there were other girls, but I never in a million years was expecting to be what it turned out to be later on. And then I found out from reading the news of the awful things that he was doing in Florida. I met a lot of those girls yesterday and the day before, and I spoke to them, and they told me their story, and like I'm just like, I have no words to say, except I just feel so sorry for all of them. Um, and like a lot of them were girls like Carolyn,
Mm.
and it just makes me cry. Every
Yes. And I mean, in some ways, I mean, what did you feel when you heard their stories and you met them? I mean, thank God you got that job. You got that way out, the fashion PR job.
Yeah, I mean, but I still kept going back. He still kept luring me back in, and when he couldn't pay for me to, I guess, pay for my salary and own me in that sense, um, he ended up offering an art studio, just a small
Um,
little communal space in Soho, belonged to Mark Epstein, as a matter of fact, um, and that was like his long term commitment from that came from me, but I wasn't being paid. He wasn't buying me things, and he did try, like, he suggested, and he was always trying to feel me out, like, "Well, what can I do with Rina to get her to engage in more?" And, I recall being on the private jet one time. We were coming back from Florida, and he was on the phone and staring directly at me and talking about Chanel and buying someone a bunch of Chanel clothes and bags, and, "Hey, I'll meet you at the Chanel store at this time today." And he's looking at me, smiling, and I'm just kind of like, whatever, like looking away, eating my little like snack that we were given snacks on our when we were traveling on his private jet. And I'm just looking down at the table, not really caring about the Chanel store. I know a lot of other girls would have probably, you know, wanted to do that. They would have probably gone back as soon as they heard the word Chanel bag. But for me, it didn't interest me. If he had said board members of the MoMA Museum, maybe I may have like gone over, maybe sat next to him and started talking to him. But he's talking about Chanel bags and Chanel clothes, and I just kind of ignored him.
did you go to the island?
I never went to the island. At the time, I couldn't travel, and I didn't wanna take the risk of traveling. Um, I had my immigration application, like, with the INS, the Department of Homeland Security at the time, and although that was a domestic flight, I didn't wanna leave until I had my paperwork and my green card. I didn't tell him right away, because you never know, like, it's just something I didn't like talking about openly with people anyway, but, he did invite me several times in the beginning. He wanted to take me to the island starting from, like, the summer of 2000, and eventually I blurted out, "Well, I can't travel, and this is the reason why I can't go." So instead of taking me to the island, he took me to Florida.
Right. And so this is the 2000s, the early 2000s. Did you ever see or hear about Donald Trump?
No, I never saw him or hear about Donald Trump, although I was taken to Donald Trump's, country club at Mar-a-Lago. I didn't know that Donald Trump owned the country club at the time, but I did see his name in the phone book. I picked up the phone book when I was in Florida. It was just in open air, sitting at the coffee table in the living room, and he had several copies of it scattered around the house.
Right.
So I went through the book, I was reading the names off the book, and I saw Donald Trump's, name and phone numbers, and I didn't think anything of it. I heard of Donald Trump. Everyone knew who Donald Trump was back in New York in the 2000s.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So how are you feeling now? I mean, I mean, it sounds like it was incredible sort of 48 hours in Washington.
I'm exhausted, you know, but I'm very emotional right now, and I'm still thinking of Carolyn. I felt like this was just something that I really wanted to do for a very long time, because people have completely forgotten about her. And if Carolyn didn't testify at the Maxwell trial, she wouldn't be sitting in jail today. Gillan was convicted on, I believe it was 5 counts of child sex trafficking because Carolyn was only 13 years old when she was recruited and groomed and drugged and then forced to go see Jeffrey Epstein. She was actually high on drugs most of the time. I
Yeah,
heard, yeah, um, and I heard at some point that she actually refused to go, and she had, I'm sorry, she had a an abusive boyfriend at the time, and I heard that he used to be very violent towards her, and forced her to go. And he was a drug addict, and so she kept going back against her will, and that just got me even more upset hearing about this. And I heard about it more recently. Um, and just doing that for her mom, actually, because her mom's still grieving, and her mom has never had the closure, and um, I wanted her to be remembered.
that's really nice.
Yeah.
So how at the end of the day did you manage to escape Jeffrey Epstein's clutches?
Um, well, I never really escaped. I just stopped seeing him, 'cause he knew where I lived, so I never talked about him. I was living with my parents, and I just never went back after that final day when he told me, "We're gonna try something new today." And that something new turned out to be, like, a really bad act of violence, something that I have told the government, it's in the court documents, but I don't want, like, I don't want the public to know what he did to me, and especially my 2 children. It was just such a horrible thing, and I just never wanted to see him again after that, like, and it was, like, a different side of him, and I wasn't expecting that, and he knew that I didn't like it, so he got very defensive too right immediately after, like, he knew that I was pissed, and he knew I was, like, really, like, upset and, like, just like he knew he did something wrong, like, and it was like he was doing something wrong the whole time, but this was a very obvious act of violence. And I never saw him again after that. I just
You
I
stayed,
knew.
like you stayed quiet because you knew where you lived and what were you, yeah, what were
And
you saying?
he had threatened me, like, when I was in Florida. He told me, "If you ever, tell anyone, what really goes around here," like, like, he threatened me and said some things, and, I naively, gave him my home address when I painted that portrait, that painting that he commissioned me to make, um, and I was a little shocked that h he wanted the butler to come to my parents' house and pick up the painting, and he did that very strategically to find out where I lived. Although I think he could have probably just picked up the phone and found out anyway. But that was more of him telling me something, like at that age, and then
Yeah.
in addition to that, what he said to me in Florida, and then after I left, I knew I couldn't open my mouth. Plus, he knew other things about me, and I was scared of him, and I just never wanted to come forward.
Where are you with your lawsuit with against Virginia? I mean, is it now going ahead against the estate?
So, yeah, it's been a very long and very exhausting journey, dealing with her false accusations. I think never in a million years she would have ever expected me to file a lawsuit. That's number one. And then number two, I think she thought this would have just quietly gone away. Um, it's been 5 years now. We're actually going into the fifth year. Um, we are waiting for her state to, like, for them for someone to form an estate, number one, and then to designate the trustees of the estate. And now we have like two groups of family members from different countries here in the United States, and then the immediate family, the husband and the children in Australia, and they're fighting over who's going to be in charge of this money, this pool of money that she collected over I don't know how many years. Um, and I think that in itself is very sad. It's another complicated situation, and it's delaying, this lawsuit from moving forward. And at this point, I am exhausted. I just want to move on. I want to get on with my life. I want these cases to be settled. Um, Next week, actually, they have a court hearing in Australia, an Australian court. And I believe it's going to be the beginning of the process of designating an interim administrator for the estate, because the families can't figure out who's going to be in charge of this estate. And I've never met her husband or children, but I have seen her brother.
Yeah, I was
Uh,
going to say he was there and in Washington.
yeah, it was a little awkward seeing him there. He didn't say hi to me the first or second time that I saw him in Washington, and was actually canceled from speaking yesterday at the press conference, because he
You were.
complained. I was canceled and he took my place. Although I was told originally that the second press conference was only going to be for Epstein survivors, no family members or friends. Um, and the night before, last minute, like literally hours before the press conference, my representatives were getting phone calls, emails from all these different people and organizations saying that they don't have time to give me 2 minutes to to provide my statement. And then the following day, I was pulled aside from Lauren Hirsch from World Without Exploitation, which is the nonprofit organization that sort of organized all the events. I don't know if they organized the press conference. Actually, that I believe was the Congress men and women. Um, But she pulled me aside and said, like, some people are complaining that you're here and that you're making them uncomfortable. And Sky Roberts, Virginia's brother, like, is very uncomfortable that you're here. And I'm sorry that we had to cancel you, but it's because, like, these people don't like you. And I was like blown away. And like, I just don't feel like that's right. I know he's sad that he lost his sister and all, but he's not a Jeffrey Epstein victim. I'm sorry, but like, why are you standing there and canceling me? I wasn't even going to talk about her at all. I was going to talk about my story, my experience, and the criminal enterprise of Jeffrey Epstein, and why we needed the transparency. And I have this whole statement that I prepared for 2 months because it was confirmed back in October, that I was going to speak and appear at the next press conference. And then my attorney, Brittany Henderson, she got in touch with me on Wednesday last week and confirmed it again. And everything was confirmed up until the last minute, until I saw Sky Roberts and his wife at the dinner the night before. And someone made a bunch of phone calls, and then they took my spot. They canceled me.
This is why this story is very complicated.
Yeah, it's very complicated, but I decided to be the bigger person. I didn't complain to anyone. I was like, you know what? Like, I'm still going to participate. You're not going to silence me forever. Um, I was not uncomfortable. I just went along with the program. I got to meet some incredible representatives. A lot of representatives are they support this fight to end all human trafficking. Um, I actually met, I thought they were Democratic representatives. They all turned out to be Republican. You know? So I'm sitting there and telling them the story of Jeffrey Epstein and my story. And, at some point, I really just started breaking down and crying. And they were so compassionate, such nice people. And I just feel like at the end of the day, there was a purpose for why I was there. And the greater purpose is, yes, that's my mission is, as a survivor advocate, is to create artwork. And that's where I express my advocacy, um, is to start this process to end human trafficking altogether, all forms of it.
Do you have any sense of what could be in the files? I mean, did you say you didn't see Trump, but did you see other prominent guys around? Did Jeffrey Epstein ever talk about how he made his money? That sort of thing.
Um, hmm. I didn't see other men that people have been talking about recently, like in the emails, sort of thing. But I have seen them outside of Jeffrey's house, like, in New York. Like, you randomly run into a lot of these prominent figures when you go to events, especially if you're working in PR. Um, I saw a good amount of the names in the phone book, but I never met those people. I did meet Glenn Dubin in Florida. Hmm. Um, but I haven't seen any emails. Excuse me. With his name attached. And I
Emails last week. Yeah.
excuse me. And I didn't see him engage in any nefarious activity. So uh, I can't testify and say I witnessed any of them.
Well, Rina, no, I mean, you'll like, I'm guessing, never have closure over what happened, but did it feel like a healing? And I mean, it looked on the outside, especially given the extraordinary results in the House and then in the Senate. From the outside, it felt to me as if this was a moment where all these women who years ago were vulnerable children, vulnerable young women like you, women who needed something, and he lasered in on that and manipulated you for his own purposes. But it felt like, in a way, this was a moment when you all were able to reclaim your power.
It did feel that way. It felt like a moment of triumph, after all these years, um, as if we're being heard and
Yep.
being treated like we're humans and not just, like, it's not just you're an Epstein victim, you were part of this scandal, like, the way that we were just treated, um, you know, brought through the multiple congressional buildings, and we were, we were fed by our government and they cared about us, and it was so endearing, and I wasn't expecting that, actually. I was just expecting to go to the press conference, and there's this other event at 5 o'clock. We're going to have this candlelight vigil. I didn't know that we were gonna actually spend the entire day with members of, House of Representatives. And then when the bill passed, and we're sitting there watching the board, and seeing all the votes, and that was kind of like the fun moment was, sitting in the gallery, and looking down on the House floor, and watching them go through like the weird ceremonial, like, I don't know what that's called, the hammer, and they're speaking like this in this old English from like 200
Yep.
years ago, um and we were all pointing out the vetoes, and we saw the first veto, and we're like, and then that person decided to change their mind, and all of a sudden the red turned green, and we saw three more red, X's on the screen on the board, and when it was all over, I learned today that there was only one person who opposed the bill, and I was like, that person is going to become the most famous person in this, in the history of this bill, the Epstein Files Transparency Act, and they were, of course, like, the first thing I read in the morning is, this person, vetoed the bill, and it was one out of the entire the like all of
All
Congress.
House of Representatives. And what was Marjorie Taylor Greene part of the representatives, and Ro Khanna and Thomas Massey? Were they part of the group that took you around the Capitol?
Um, I'm not exactly sure if they were part of that group that took the survivors around the Capitol. They certainly weren't part of my group. We were segmented into 4 groups.
I see.
So, we each group went and met with different representatives, and then we all came together again, and had a meeting with the Democratic Caucus, and that was really, really nice. We sat, in this big conference room, and we each got some space to talk about why we were there and why it was so important to, have this transparency. I got to meet Nancy Pelosi. I got to meet some incredible, congresswomen, and that was so special too. Like, I was not expecting any of this. Like, I really just was expecting to go to a press conference, go to this other event, and then go home. But the entire day we spent with members of our government. We spent the entire day with members of Congress. And then at the end of the day, we found out after we left that the Senate passed a bill, and then now everyone's like holding their breath, like, well, now it's sitting in front of Mr. President's desk. What's going to happen next? Like, what do you think, Rita? I was like, well, he's got to sign it now. There's no way he can't sign it at this point. Like, I don't know, but we'll see. What do you
That
think, Vicky? Do you think he'll sign it?
I am an optimist. I think, yes, Donald Trump doesn't like to be on the losing team, and so I think he has no choice but to sign it.
He has no choice but to sign it.
Yes, I do think so. Rena, is there anything I haven't asked you? I mean, this has been so informative.
Um, there, it's something that you haven't asked, but I would like to bring up and go back to giving Carolyn, more visibility and more space. And I am determined to create a bronze sculpture, in memory of Carolyn, a monument. And Washington, D.C. is the monument capital of our country. And I am going to start raising funds, applying for grants, and we'll be working with the representatives that I met yesterday to help me create this memorial piece for Carolyn. And it's also going to serve as a memorial piece for yesterday and all of the survivors. There's at least 1,000 of us. And I want everyone to always remember that these survivors of Jeffrey Epstein, we are humans. Every single one of us matters. Our stories matter. And we have brought this man down long after he died, but now we're going to dismantle the organized criminal enterprise that exists. Like, it's still there, but we need to find out all the different layers and who they are and what they are, but it's all going to get dismantled. And once that happens, we're going to move on to the next case. And the next case will be another big predator. There are a couple that are lined up already that I'm speaking to different attorneys, people that work, covertly and bringing down the bad guys. So, that's going to be the next chapter to this story. It's not going to end until all of it is dismantled. And that is the greater picture.
Rina, it's been wonderful to speak to you on the day after what was a very, very historic day. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me, Vicki. Bye.
Bye.